like to thank you for taking the time to stop down and listen to Bob Champion, Steve Kaloji. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell you what their role has been over the years with the Department of Transportation. And then they're going to tell us a couple of stories that they know we're dying to hear. And then we're going to open it up for a question answer time. So, Steve, if you want to start with the introduction, go ahead. Of yourself.
Well, I don't know where to start. When I was born, my folks lived in a place called Riebler, which was about halfway between Sims and Augusta. And when I was about a year old, we moved to the big city of Sims. And I spent my growing up years there and graduated from Sims High School. Then I went to college in Bozeman. I got a degree in civil engineering. And I went to work for the good old highway department. And the starting salary was pretty good. We thought in those days it was a little over $400 a month, you know, which seemed pretty good. It wouldn't seem too good now. A lot of things have changed. So they had what was called a kind of a training program. And so I started out in bridge, and I worked on Bob Kerper's design crew. And of course, he's since passed on, as have most of the guys that were in bridge then. Some of the structures I worked on were an interstate bridge across the Tongue River at Miles City. I worked on the railroad overpass here in Helena, and it's still there. Although I hear it's getting ready to be replaced or widened or something, which is a good move. And then I worked in road design and traffic in the lab. And then I was sent out in the field. We were building, in the summer of '59, we were building the interstate from Great Falls to Vaughan. One afternoon, a guy from personnel came out Friday afternoon, and he said there's a couple guys in the interstate division had quit. And their names were Don Park and Harley Blendauer. He said, so we have two vacancies, and we'd like you to take one. And I said, well, gee, I appreciate the offer, you know, but I'd kind of like to stay on this construction job until we finish it, and then maybe move back to Helena. He said, well, suit yourself, he said, but I want you to understand, when this job is done, you might not have a job in Helena. And I says, I get the message. When did you want me in Helena? He said, Monday morning. So that's how promotions and advertising and all of that went in those days. Things moved right along. So I went into the interstate division, and Grover Powers was the boss, and his assistant was a young fellow by the name of Art Quinnell, and his dad at that time was Fred Quinnell, who was the chief engineer. And I'm not sure if that's how Art got his job or not. Art was pretty qualified, you know. But nevertheless, he was Grover's assistant, and I got one of those vacancies. And Dave Johnson came in from Billings, and he got the other vacancy. The interstate division was a thing that had been organized when the interstate came along, and it was, you couldn't call it a design function. It was more of a planning function. Our job in the interstate division was to figure out where the route was going to go. Just for instance, here from Helena, we studied 3 alternates between here and Wolf Creek, or a little north of Wolf Creek. We studied the one that eventually got built. Then we had another alternate leaving Helena that swung over closer to the Scratch Gravel Hills and then paralleled the railroad track going north. And then from there we had one alternate that went out to Silver City and and into the Prickly Pear Canyon, and then down towards Sebring, where it goes now. And then, of course, we had the alternate over the hill, where it eventually got built. We also had an alternate that went over Helen Hill, but then it took off to the right, over out there by the gates of the mountains, and jumped across the river and went down the east side of Bolter Lake towards Wolf Creek, and then hooked up with the existing highway out northeast of Wolf Creek. And needless to say, it didn't get built. I think everybody's happy with what we did out there. But we did things like that. We were doing route studies, location studies. We did a lot of route study type of work between Boulder and Butte. Lookout Pass studies. We studied a lot of different alternates between Saltese, Montana and Mullen, Idaho. We had the route where the old highway went, where the present route goes. It went west out of Saltese and up through Taft and over Lookout Pass and down into Mullen. The Idaho Highway Department, they kind of had it in their head that they didn't really particularly like Mullen Pass. They wanted to maybe get on the Mullen, they didn't like Lookout Pass. They wanted to get into Mullen Pass, which is the next big pass to the north. So we had different alternates in the Montana side, going from Saltese up towards Mullen Pass. We had one going out of Saltese that went up Packer Creek to the north, and then to the west and over Mullen Pass. And then we had another alternate that went west out of Saltese up to about the Taft, and then we went north up Randolph Creek up towards Mullen Pass. And of course, Idaho, then they had different alternates getting from Mullen Pass and Lookout Pass down to Mullen. They would have kind of liked to go on the other side of the canyon because they had better exposure over there. But, and then we also had a tunnel alternate under St. Regis Pass, which is between Lookout Pass and the railroad goes through St. Paul Pass quite a bit to the south of Lookout Pass, and they get into a different drainage. But St. Regis Pass, our tunnel would have gone, still came out on the Mullen drainage. And so that was interesting. What was interesting about it is here was Idaho. They wanted to somehow stay away from Lookout Pass, but Mullen Pass off to the north was quite a bit higher. And the way it finally turned out for them, their best alternate going up to Mullen Pass went right by Lookout Pass, still going up towards Mullen Pass. And so we were meeting with the Idaho folks probably once a year or maybe twice a year over several years before that got resolved. So that was interesting. Missoula East and West, we call it. We studied different alternates. We had one that took off out at Bonner, kind of went up behind Mount Jumbo, and when it come out, they're about where the Grant Creek interchange is now. And we had different alternates. We were kind of in a tight spot between the brewery and the water tank, the municipal water service there. And we could have fit between the brewery and the water tank at Missoula, but they wanted to sell, and I think at a higher level than our division, the department decided to buy the brewery, so then we had quite a bit of room to get through there. So that worked out pretty well. I remember at the public hearing for the Missoula East and West, Wellington Rankin was there, and he was against what we were doing. I can't remember just why he was against it, but he thought we ought to follow the Milwaukee road through Missoula, parallel it down by the river. I'm sure we would have studied that in more detail if that railroad would have been gone, and we would have had some right of way there. But I think it's turned out for the best where we put it. We would have been in all sorts of trouble with floodplain and city and everybody else down along that river. So for the most part, I think what we did has turned out for the best. I don't know if you could say we made any bad mistakes on our locations. But anyway, back to the Interstate Division. Some of the stuff we did in there that was just as tough as the route locations was, where are the interchanges going to go? You know, when you're in Great Falls, where are you going to put interchanges? When we came in from the field, Butte was already decided, so we didn't have much to say about what was going on through Butte. And Helena had been pretty much decided. But in Missoula, you know, there was always questions about where the interchanges should go. Same way at Drummond. We studied different alternates at Drummond, and where should the interchanges go? And where should separations go? How about frontage roads? What needs to have a frontage road and what doesn't? So we had a lot of interesting problems to solve, and I think we solved them for the most part for the better. You see, some of the other, one of the things we did in the Interstate Division, for every project, we wrote what was called a planning report, which set forth the various things that the road designers should do when they get started designing. We put in there, are you going to use the stake line that came in with the survey, or are we going to project it to the right or to the left? What's going to be the design speed? Where's the interchanges go? Where's the separations go? Right across from our Interstate Division was the Traffic Division, and they did the geometrics for interchanges, and they would be sent then to road design about the same time we did the planning reports. We put design speed in there, our maximum degrees of curvature, maximum grades that would be used, where the frontage roads would go. I think we also put in there whether it was going to be asphalt pavement or concrete, but I don't think we decided that in the Interstate Division. I think that was decided higher up, like in the chief's office or maybe even at the commission level, what was going to be concrete and what was going to be asphalt. But we tried to get it so when road design got the project, we had set forth the design criteria and supposedly clear sailing. Also, it was our job to get all this stuff I've been talking about approved by the Federal Highway Administration. And I guess at that time they were probably the Bureau of Public Roads, or we'd call them the Bureau of Parallel Ruts. But then eventually it changed over to Federal Highway Administration. In fact, when we first started on all of this, the Federal Highway Administration, or BPR, whatever we might call them, their office was in Missoula, and we were in Helena, which was a little clumsy. And then they got moved in, and they went in, we were all in the Scott Hart building there on 6th and Robbins. And they took over our 5th floor. We had them up on 5th floor for quite some time until they moved into their new quarters over on 11th and B Street. And planning moved to the 5th floor, and things got jolted around in our old building. So it was an interesting experience. Somebody said that I should talk a little bit about AASHTO and Green Book Committee. In 75, I was pre-construction engineer, I guess, and I had been on the AASHTO Design Committee for a number of years, since back in the days when I was road design engineer. But anyway, I got appointed to a geometric design task force. And our first job was we were given the task to either rewrite what was then called the blue book or the red book, and I can't remember which one. At that time, the urban standards were in a red or a maroon book, and the rural standards were in a blue book. So we started rewriting one of them, and then somebody decided, no, we think we want that all in one book. So we decided, well, we're going to call it the purple book. But somebody higher up decided that wasn't the way to go, so it got named the green book. And so we eventually came out with the new green book, and in fact, before I retired, we had probably written that green book 2 or 3 more times, always for different reasons. One time there was a move afoot to turn everything into metric system. And of course, we were at the state level, we were pretty much all against it. But we started writing this new green book with metrics, and you don't know whether you're going to make it hard metric or soft metric. By that I mean, do you write it in English units and then in bold letters right behind it you put the metric unit, or do you go the other way around and make it a hard metric book with the English units written in? I forget how we did it, but we eventually came out with a book. And about that time, the feds kind of backed off and said, we don't have to go there. So I think that was all for naught, all that, writing the new green book. But I think after I retired, then they got back on that kick again, and you guys maybe did go back. I don't know, because I've been gone since. Metric still doesn't seem to be real popular.
We went back to English.
Oh, you went back? I guess I have. So anyway, the geometric design standards was always an interesting process. My wife would usually go with me when we'd have those meetings, and we became friends with a lot of people from a lot of different states. Some interesting characters. One of the guys on these weren't all from states. Some of them were, one of the guys was the director of public works for Chicago. And he'd been there since Mayor Daley was the boss. When he'd go out on a project, he didn't go in an old Oregon State car, like we did. He went in a chauffeur-driven limousine. One we had a fellow who was chief engineer for the city of Los Angeles. We had the director of public works for the city of New Orleans. And I can remember him saying that we're kind of riding for a fall in New Orleans. He says, some of those pumps that we got were made in the 1800s. And he says, if we ever have a bad event, we're going to have a terrible flood. And he never saw it. He died before the flood hit, but he was certainly right about somebody should have worried more about that. I guess they are now. I've run on long enough, Bob. Go ahead.
Thanks. I came here to the DOT by a much more roundabout route. I, like Steve, graduated from Montana State in civil engineering. I initially went to work for the Bureau of Public Roads, so don't take on too much. And
I can't because Mark's watching.
no, that's right. That's right. Yeah. And I worked for them in Washington and Oregon for a year and a half or 2 years. Got drafted into the Army. Spent time in a big construction group where we had a couple of battalions that were supposed to build the things that we designed, and Not much of that got done. We did the design work, but at that time, there was peacetime and there wasn't any budget hardly for them to build anything, but we did do some things, and it was a good experience for me, but I was damn glad when it was over. I came back to Montana then, married the woman I was in love with, went to work for the department about the same time Steve did. Started out in Great Falls District for Ben Briscoe and worked out there. Then in about a year and a half, I was transferred in here. I worked in bridge for a while and road design for a while, and then Steve did a good job outlining what we did in interstate, and I went in interstate, and could maybe say a little bit more about Grover Powers. Grover Powers was a very interesting person in his own right. He was our boss there. He had the reason he came to the department, and not many people know this, but at that time in history, Montana hadn't built any kind of a controlled access freeway like the interstate system. So the reason Grover was hired was that he had worked on the Ohio Turnpike for, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 years. He was an interesting person. He'd been a bomber pilot in World War II, and so he was pretty outspoken, and he stepped on some toes, but he was a good boss as far as we're concerned, and got the job done. So it was an interesting time to work in interstate, and there were a lot of issues and controversies. I guess in putting this on, I think the people that put this thing today on expect, and I had expected too, that there would be quite a lot of questions and discussions about why did you guys do this, and so on and so on. So when we stop talking here, we're hoping that there are I guess you'd say we're expecting that there are some things that went on that that people would be interested enough that they'd want to know more about them, and we'd hope that there is some discussion. Anyhow, I was in interstate for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, I guess. During that time, I started reading law at night, and I took the bar exam and passed it in 1963, and that resulted in me being sent to right-of-way. There had been a lot of controversy in right-of-way, and probably always will be to some extent. But anyhow, I wound up in right-of-way, so I was in charge of right-of-way for 14 years. That is an interesting job. You get to meet a lot of people. Unfortunately, a lot of the people are landowners who are already angry or wanted more money or both, and they didn't all have lawyers, but the vast majority didn't have lawyers. So part of the deal is you get to arm wrestle the lawyers and the landowner. And then the other part of it is, in the meantime, you're the last one in line, and you're holding up the contract from going to lettings, so the boss is beating on the back, wanting you to hurry up and get to the right-of-way boss. So that was an interesting job. I enjoyed it, but and I guess I learned a lot more than anything else. I bounced off a lot of people, and that didn't hurt me. Then after that, what happened? We got a new boss named Gary Wicks. Some of you may be long enough served so to remember Gary Wicks. Gary Wicks, to me, was an impressive person. I think he was probably the strongest manager we ever had in the department. He tried to do some interesting things like start a formal employee rating system I don't know whether that exists now, but I've always think that it was a good thing and that I think, pushed the people along and it let them and their boss know what they where they stand. I don't know whether that exists now or not, and it's ancient history as far as I'm concerned. Gary, when he found out what was going on then, wanted to make some changes. One of the things he wanted changed was he wanted, previous to that, he had the feeling that the engineering people had too much control over what you'd call picking the projects, deciding which things were priorities. And so he wanted to create a unit that was separate from engineering. They called it program development. I headed that then, and the idea was that to take the basic data that planning survey always had about the condition and adequacy of the roads, whether they were up to capacity, whether they were, what their safety record was and that kind of thing, and take all of that and use that to put together a defensible program then that you could take to the commission and the legislature that had some cogent facts to back it up. So that was what I did for, and I don't even remember, 2 or 3 years. Then after that, the department, and you'll see this over the years, this doesn't come as any surprise to anybody who's been here very long. The department goes through changes and shakeups, and then one of the shakeups was we got a new director appointed. His name was Larry Larson. He's one of relatively few directors over the years that was a professional engineer. He had worked for consultants in the state over mostly Morrison Merrily over quite a long period of time. And so he was the director. He asked me to be his deputy, and so I became the deputy. And then there was another shakeup, and Larry was out, and the last director I worked under was a man named John Rothwell from Great Falls. John had been the chairman of the State Tax Appeals Board for several years, and so was somewhat acquainted with government, and so I was his deputy for, I think, 2 or 3 years. Then the politics changed again, and so that at that time John was out, and so was Bob. So, but I had 35 years at that time. I had done as much as I could to get my I-3 up, you know what I'm talking about and what that means. And so I retired, and since then for 20 years I've hunted and fished and played, kind of like Steve and some other lucky people. And looking at that whole picture, I think we're people who were really very fortunate to come here at the time we did, to have challenging work and most of the time get along well enough to be able to sleep at night and so on, and really get something real and tangible that accomplished. And I think that's one, in my mind, at least from my position, from my perspective, I think it's a real blessing to be able to do the kind of work that we've all been involved in, because you're doing something worthwhile, you're doing something that's needed, and you have something you can look at and take pride in. And at least for myself, and I think for most of the people that go through these chairs over the years, that's a wonderful thing about the kind of work we're doing compared to what a lot of people do every day. At least that's my personal feeling about it. We were hoping, I think, as this program went on, that we could have the opportunity to discuss questions, to answer questions or issues that are on people's minds. So if anybody has anything, we can hope that they want to know, they're welcome to ask. We hope they will. And we, I guess, would like to use most of the time we have to talk about or quiz about why did you do this or why did you do that or what else happened. So if anybody does, fire away.
I've got one. What drove the selection of the I-15 between Helena and Butte, going through Boulder Basin or that? I've heard that this is, when I first came to Montana, that decision had already been made, and I was told there was an alternate route that came off of Highway 69 at Boulder that could have been built much more cheaply. Are there any details of
Well,
that?
that makes a lot, thank you. That makes a lot of sense to me. That Butte, we didn't discuss this in much detail. Butte happened, the Butte district happened to be all my area, so that I can answer that directly. First of all, the right answer from an engineer, in Bob's opinion, the right answer from a technical point of view and a public point of view was simply, and I think this is what you're driving at, Mark, was to start at Dillon, to come up the water, to go to Boulder by going over what was called Whitetail Pass, which is a gravel road south of Boulder, and then to come up like we did up here. So the question is, why in the hell did it go through Butte? The answer was the politics when it was set up originally. Butte was the designated control point for I-15. So we were stuck, if you want to use that word, with the mandate that I-15 would come through Butte. Now there were other variables too. The other principal variable was the geography. That is, there was a route, and it's called Nez Perce Pass. A lot of people don't even know about it. It starts in Boulder, goes essentially straight south, and comes in right on top of the Woodville Hill. It's the route that was originally followed by the original power lines that put the first power into Butte. Those old lines are still there. They're still in service. Interestingly, some of those old cedar poles are 100 years old, and they're still in service, which is neither here nor there, but that was an alternate route. The minuses of that, and that route, it would have saved, I think, either 5 or 7 miles in distance through Butte and Boulder. People don't know that, most people don't know this. Basin is actually a mile north of Boulder. If you get on a map and look it up. So it would have saved a great deal of travel distance. The big minus is it would have torn up a lot of pretty virginal mountain country in order to build it. It was mountain all the way. It would have cost a lot of money. Probably, we never did a cost analysis.
Oh, yeah,
Did we?
Oh,
I beg your pardon.
Couple
Okay.
times, yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm wrong about that. But anyhow, that Nez Perce Pass, the worst thing about it in my mind was that I can't remember the right of elevation, if it was 7,300 feet or something.
About 1,000 feet higher than the old part
Yeah,
of flats.
it would be like building another road, what do you call the pass south of Nyhart?
Kings Hill.
Kings Hill, like that. I'm not a skier. It'd been, so you'd be faced with the winter maintenance, which is a big burden there. You'd put the main line into that winter maintenance. So both based on the politics and public opinion, and I think based on sound engineering. I don't think we want to put a freeway over Nez Perce Pass.
There was a lot of studies done on the routing of that chunk of I-15. When Bob left the interstate division, he went down the floor or two downstairs for a better job. Then I'd been working on the interstate in the Missoula district and the Great Falls district, but I think then I inherited the Butte stuff too. And so one of my jobs was to do a study of the Nez Perce Pass versus the Basin route. And so we did that. And we did contour mapped the whole thing and did a pretty decent study and made a pretty good estimates on both. And I don't even remember now which one came out the cheaper. The Nez Perce being 1,000 feet higher than Elk Park is quite a bite. You know what Elk Park is like in the wintertime. Well, just imagine 1,000 feet higher. And it isn't just a pass. As you go up from Butte, you go up the Nez Perce Creek towards Elk Park Pass, and you can, if you know where to look, you can still see a kind of a notch up there in the trees where that power line either went through or still goes through. But when you see that notch, where they always kept the trees cut out along that power line, you could tell exactly where Nez Perce Pass was. But anyway, if you go up there, you can walk up there. You aren't going to drive up there, but you can walk up there, and it's I think the geologists call it something like a perch peneplain or something like that, and it's flat up there. It's kind of like Elk Park Flat, only it's swampy, which is hard to believe when you get 1,000 feet higher than Elk Park Flats to find a swamp. But here it is, this little creek meandering out through this swamp for, I don't remember now how far it is, just a mile or so, and then it takes off down going to the northeast and you're headed to Boulder. And the alignment as you go down is pretty good until you get just about to the bottom. And you're on a 5% grade all the way going down, but then you have a nest of curves. That would have been a problem right before you break out of the canyon. So we would have had problems. You remember after we first built Homestead, the first 10 years were kind of rocky because we were losing trucks. They get going too fast going east towards Whitehall. They'd think they were clear sailing and they weren't. And they'd lose it. So we'd flatten the curve, and then they lose it on the next one. And I don't know how they're doing up there now. For a while they had a speed limit for trucks. I don't know if they still do. And then, so anyway, we did that stuff. And then years later, and I can't remember what years I'm talking about, when we hired Morrison and Merrill to reanalyze the Nez Perce route, the Basin route, but also do a complete analysis on the Dillon to Whitehall to Boulder route. And of course you could build that pretty easily. It's just like shooting fish in a barrel. We always used to call it I-17. But one of the problems is with it is you still got the traffic on the old highway. When you leave south of here, where are you going? Usually you're going to Butte. You're not going to Dillon, or you're not going to Whitehall. You're usually going to Butte. And it's the same way with the people down in Dillon. Where do they go when they go north? They're going to Butte. They're not necessarily going to Helena or Great Falls. So we would have been faced with having a good interstate on I-17 and have had to put a lot of money into improving where we eventually built the interstate. maybe not to quite as high a standard as what we did, but we would have had more money on, more traffic on that route than we had on the interstate. And so when you build something that doesn't attract the traffic, you start wondering, are you really in the right place? So anyway, the results of that Morris and Merrill study was, yes, we should build it where it eventually went.
So what about environmental things while you guys were doing the interstate?
We didn't allow environmental control.
Sorry I asked.
People would
We're
say that
engineers.
us old highway engineers were not very sensitive to stuff like that. You know? And some of that's probably true. Here was the Bureau of Public Roads on one hand. They were trying to hold the costs down. So everything we did was looked at pretty closely from the cost standpoint. I remember the first job, Lady Bird was running things for a while there in the mid and late 60s. And so we started putting topsoil on the slopes, and everybody was just wringing their heads, my God, what a waste of money. You know, putting topsoil on back slopes. And now it's just, that's a way of life. You wouldn't dream of building a highway project without topsoil and seeding and all of that.
Go ahead, please.
Can you talk a little bit about on the interstate system and how we inherited some of those orphan routes, like old US 10 between Billings and Isham, and some of that maybe Bowling Road around Missoula, and how most of the routes we gave back to the counties to maintain, but we ended up retaining ownership on some of those highways. Just maybe if you have any stories about that.
Yeah, when we first started building the interstate, that was our stock answer, is the existing traveled way goes back to the appropriate local unit of government. I remember one public hearing in Butte, you might imagine this being in Butte, and the Director of Public Works, and I can't remember his name anymore, he was a typical Butte fellow who knew how to stand up for himself, and we had a lengthy argument about whether the department could really make that stick, and at that time we were talking about what was then US 10 that went through Butte. And anyhow, ultimately, I don't know that it was ever litigated, but it seems to be the case that most of those situations, that the department continues to maintain that route. But I'd be glad to be corrected by anybody.
Well, I remember kind of the way you do, Bob. We always told the counties at public hearings and that you get the old road. But then something went through the legislature one time. The legislature passed a law, maybe I remember
No, I
that
think
too,
you're right.
that said that the highway department's going to be responsible for all frontage roads. And so then if that road then is, what does it become? Is it a frontage road? Like US 91 going across the Helena Valley. I can't remember if we ever tried to dump that off on the county or not. We just kept maintaining it. But it's a kind of a frontage road. You know, so the county would say, well, that's a frontage road. The law says you gotta maintain it. Do you think I'm remembering that wrong about that?
No, I don't think you're remembering it wrong, and I guess maybe we should say this, but I'll go ahead. I'll say it. Mine, I guess.
They're not on fire yet.
I don't. If I'd say it this way, if it's ever been taken to the legislature, and I don't think it has, but I'm not sure. If it's ever been taken to the legislature, you know damn right well what's going to happen. The highway's going to be stuck with it, because that's the sentiment almost universally in Montana. And we work for the public. If that's what they want, it's our job to do it. But again, I don't think it's ever been the subject of clear legislation, but I'll bet the current status, the current situation is still the status quo where you had it once and you got it, because nobody will take it back. Shoot.
I saw in the flyer it talked about you guys might have had a little bit of involvement with the pipe organ slide.
I had a lot of involvement with the pipe organ slide.
The reason I work in the geotech section, I got to revisit it because they were planning to put the Misty power transmission line across it.
Oh, are they?
Not anymore.
Yeah, I was going to say they're in for a big eye opener, as we were. Yeah. Oh yeah, well, yeah, that was my area at the time, like Steve described. For those of you who don't know, about 25 miles south of Dillon is a unique geologic place called the Pipe Organ Rocks. What it is truly unique. There's a set of rocks there, probably covers, I don't know, 3 or 4 acres, but they really look like individual pipe organs standing up there. You just look to your right as you go by. About 3 miles north of there, there's a place where the whole canyon, the whole country really necks down, and it goes around a great big cliff that's on the westerly side of the road. And we, for a variety of reasons, well, I'll tell you the rest of the story. Buck Dundas at that time was district engineer in Butte. Buck was a strong-willed person and a good engineer. He did an awful lot to try to be sure that none of 15 south of Butte to the Idaho line was built with a flush median. He felt strongly that, and would be very proud to have gotten that whole thing so that you had depressed median one way or the other. And so, and not entirely for that reason, we wanted to stay away from that big rock if we could, even though the existing road went right along the edge of the rock. Okay, so we went bravely ahead, and foolishly ahead, I guess you'd say, and proceeded to let a contract for construction of the 15 on the other side of the river. The other side of the river was occupied by the Milwaukee's main line from Salt Lake to Butte, and we let the contract, and they started digging, and pretty soon the Milwaukee's track started to walk down the hill, because we figured we should have known. I should have known, but I wasn't that cognizant of geology, that whole thing, even though it looked like a dry old sheep pasture, sort of, except it sloped a little bit, but it was just pregnant with water. And so when they started digging, the old Milwaukee track starts walking down the hill. Well, we aborted the contract and bit the bullet and ultimately built 15 right underneath the big rock. If you ever go to look at it, one other interesting thing there, one other interesting thing, there's a really neat large hieroglyph that's still there that's at the south edge of that. If you look over to your right, just as you go by it, it's really neat, and it's an unusually big one, which is not part of highway engineering at all. Thank you for asking.
That went on for years and years, what to do with that. Our lab drilled a lot of holes up in there, and they had drains in there draining the water out. And it wasn't just a small slide, down in the back slope. When the toe came out of that, the cut, the thing started moving way back up. There was tension cracks, hundreds of feet up that slope.
Well, at one time, I think it was the largest highway-related landslide in the United States, and that's probably why you couldn't recognize.
No, it's one of those things, and it's the bull.
Well, it's too big to recognize.
Yeah, in a sense, you know, and we never, and if I'd have walked right over on top of it, which I never did, you wouldn't have known anything about it. The U-Beats sat there for years and ran on it.
You wouldn't want to walk, it's just lousy with rattlesnakes.
Oh, is it? Yeah, I'll bet it is. I'll bet it is, yeah.
A little story with that Buck Douglas, like Champ said, was the district engineer in Newton. And Slim Gordon was the Federal Highway Administration's or Bureau of Public Roads area engineer for that area. And he had been raised there. There was a town it's still there, but it's buried under the lake. And anyway, Slim was from Armstead. And they had, I wasn't at it, this is probably still in the days when that was maybe Champ's area, I don't know. But Buck was fretting and stewing about, he was afraid the back slope was not gonna be stable. And Slim said, I'll bet you a steak dinner that'll never slide. But I don't think the back slope slid, the whole mountain came. I asked Buck one time, did you ever get that steak? And he said, no.
Shoot, get those guys a chance.
Steve, you touched on this earlier, but about where the interstate went northbound. It's going to possibly go north and then east of Holter Lake, and then go down. But now it goes over North Hill and through Suicide and down over Canyon. I've learned that whole life every time I look at it and thought about it. How did, that was the shortest direction to go. Mm-hmm. But the direction it goes now, why didn't it go through Canyon Creek and go down through there?
Well, we had one alternate that skirted the west side of the Helena Valley and went out through Silver City, more or less followed the railroad to Silver City, and then on down Prickly Pear Canyon between the Chevalier Ranch and the Seaman Ranch. But there again, we would have been stuck with maintaining a highway, or somebody, the public, I say we, I don't mean necessarily the highway department, but the taxpayers would have been stuck with maintaining that other highway or that other road. And we would have, this was before we had problems with the Fish and Game, before there was a Stream Preservation Act, and everybody said we were not sensitive to those types of things. But we were, and that was one of the reasons why we stayed out of there, because you couldn't have really got down through that canyon between Chevaliers and Seaman without doing a lot of damage to Prickly Pear Creek. Probably had to move the railroad and, you know what I mean, all sorts of problems. But we did study it because we didn't want to pass up a good bet, you know, if there was a chance that it should have gone there.
In your study for the one east of Holter Lake, where would that have been if you were?
Well, that's been a lot of years ago. But the way I remember, we would have followed the present route, pretty much to about where the gates of the mountains interchange, is in there someplace. And then we would have skirted off to the right, stayed east of the head of the Sleeping Giant, jump across the river right in there someplace, and then gone down the eastern shore of Holter Lake. And of course, it's all cabins now. And I think there were a few cabins there then, but nothing like there is now. But there again, we would have missed Wolf Creek, and somebody would have still had to maintain this road going down Wolf Creek Canyon.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
And we would have had, it was quite another pass to get from off to the right of the Sleeping Giant. You would have had to bounce over another ridge. So you would have had another pass in the system, which we don't need in the winter time especially.
Shoot.
How was this decision made to use concrete versus asphalt on the interstate? Like on Lookout Pass, was all built concrete, and I've always was curious why.
Good choice, yeah.
Well, I think it was more probably political than engineering wise, but I'm not sure.
Well, a little more on that. The economic fact is that there are, at least to then, plants in Montana that were making Portland cement concrete. And I'm sure that there were at least a couple occasions when the people that represented those plants went to the Highway Commission. I was present or whatever, but went to them and of course said, look, we're a Montana industry, we're employing Montana people, couldn't you guys find it in your hearts to use our product? We know you're not going to use it everywhere, you haven't used it significantly in the past at all, but couldn't you find it in your hearts to help us by designated a certain portion of the interstate system to be paved with concrete? And I think frankly there were some places where there was an honest engineering opinion that concrete would be the better long-term solution. I don't have any facts to back that up, but the best of my knowledge, that is essentially what happened. And you know, just as a citizen of Montana, I don't think that's necessarily a giveaway or a poor decision.
You know, over the years, there's been a lot of different people trying to make economic analyses of which is the best. You know, theoretically, at least, concrete's going to last. They used to say 2 or 3 times as long as asphalt. Well, it's better because it costs quite a bit more. But I don't know. The materials people now probably have a pretty good idea. They could do a better job analyzing it than what we could back then because they have some history to go on. But about the time I retired 20 years ago, we covered up the asphalt in the Gallatin Valley with black stuff. Excuse me, go ahead.
One other factor too that kind of supports the decision that wasn't really made that way, the advent of slip-form concrete paving, I think changed that equation to some degree. Personally, I think the end product is better, your control's better, and your prices are cheaper. It still costs a lot more than black, there's no question about that, but there are some pluses to it.
You notice the big cities, or the states with a lot of traffic, they pretty much all use concrete, whereas ours is mostly black. Jim?
Steve Bob, I see we're kind of getting on our finishing time here, but this isn't as much a question as just an observation of how much things are the same since you guys were in the business here, and how hugely different they are. So some of the things that you folks set up way back when, we still do it that way today, and it works pretty damn good. And but some of the tools we have today are so good and such an improvement that you guys never had the opportunity to have. So it was interesting, and a real pointed one was right-of-way. Right-of-way still in the same boat. They're at the end of the chain. They're holding up the project. Everybody's on their case to get done.
Anyway, it was an adventure working for the highway department. I wouldn't have missed a moment of it. I remember going out on planning hands and that, and telling the guys in the car, it's hard to believe that they pay us to do this. And then 10 minutes later, I'd be complaining they don't pay us enough.
One comment I wanted to say, this is just a personal observation. I've had very little current contact with how decisions are made here, but I think I would say that I see some signs that the department is evolving in ways that are a lot better. They're immeasurably better than than they were when we were here. When we were here, we operated under pretty strict guidelines or whatever, that there were just a lot of things that people asked for that our answer is hell no, we're not gonna do that for one reason or another. I guess I see some of the things that encourage me that the department, I suspect, is doing a measurably better job in listening to the public. Not necessarily doing everything everybody wants. Lord knows you can't do that. But I see some things that the department has done that I think look positive to me. The other thing is, I'd say that the department today seems to be more flexible in what they will look at as possibilities. Two things that I just happen to be aware of, that one of them is what you've done to build 93 across the reservation in western Montana. They're north of our Lee. Things that were done there that seemed to satisfy them and get the job done, and now there's a good road there, are the result of compromises that we would never have made, or we say we'd never made them. Maybe you wouldn't have any new 93 if we hadn't. But in other words, the department seems to be more willing to listen to other people's ideas and to compromise more. I'm glad to see that, and maybe we were too darn ornery. We probably were, I probably was.
Well, I don't want to hold up others that have to leave or want to leave, so if you need to leave, feel free to. Bob and Champ are going to stay for a little bit longer and answer a few more questions, but I don't want anyone to not leave because we're still going, so feel free.
Thank you.
And one of the questions that I have, I do the biennial survey with the university to see how we're doing as a department and what we need to work on. And one of the things you touched on, Bob, was the fact it was our communication. That's one of the things that the public says to us a lot, is that we're poor communicators. We don't communicate. So we are actually getting kind of a committee together to try and figure out how we as a department can do a better job in communicating with the public and some of our constituents. So if you have more ideas on how that can be done, or how
I'm glad to hear that.
yeah, it's out there right now, so
Yeah.
like Jim says, some things never
Is it
change.
aimed particularly at the next legislature, or not necessarily?
No, not
Okay,
necessarily,
okay.
just in general.
Yeah.
So, do you have any ideas on how we can do a better job at that, having stepped out of this world and into the
Sure.
public?
Are you addressing that to me?
Yeah, or either, yeah.
I guess I'm an old man now. One thing I've learned as I get older is simply listening. Simply learn to listen to other people. And that's one thing, when talking about right away, that's one of the classes we taught. There's one class that simply tries to teach your right-of-way agents to learn to listen. To put it crudely, shut your mouth and listen to what other people have to say. It's too old for me to adapt to that.
Okay.
It's harder for me to listen because my wife says I'm getting deaf.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
Yeah, anybody else, anything? Our group has shrunk, but the discussion's interesting, and you can see we like to talk.
I would like to hear about some of the airplane rides you went on back in the day.
We had a lot of Swede Lindgren was our pilot. We'd go to different places for public hearings, and I remember one night where it brought us for public hearing. And the deer were out on the runway, and so we're trying to get the deer off the runway so we could get the airplane off the ground without piling into the deer. So here's the district engineer driving up and down the runway with the horn lights blinking and the horn blaring, trying to chase the deer away. And so then the last pass, while we get right behind the car with the airplane, and away we go. And at the last minute, then he's tooting the horn, and then he dives out of the way, and we take off, and we didn't hit a deer.
About the story about the overloaded plane and got out at all.
Now, that wasn't Swede. That was one time Swede's plane was gone or something, and we were going to Lewiston. I don't know. But there was also, maintenance was having something going on over there. And so we had an aeronautics plane. The pilot's name was Bob. We thought he was an old man. He's probably about 20 years younger than what I am now. But here we had some big guys. We had Dick Rogers and a lot of heavyweights. And the darn airplane tips over backwards, you know. And we finally figured out we had to load the front seats first and then get the people in the back seats. There was about 6 of us all together. There wasn't a little one in the bunch. And we finally get going towards Lewiston. We made it over the Sleeping Giant. It didn't look very far down there to me. One time we were going, we got federal aid when we go on an interstate project to Glendive or someplace. And so Jack Walsh was in charge of bridge maintenance. And so he liked to bum rides with us because he didn't have a federal aid budget. He was operating on state maintenance money. So we were going to Glendive, and it was probably this time of the year, or maybe a couple months later. It was about 30 below zero. And Jack wanted to go to Miles City. So we decided we'd take Jack to Miles City. We go to land at the Miles City Airport, and the wheel, or the grease got so thick in the nose wheel that the tire started turning on the wheel. And so here we were going on the runway, that front tire just flapping away. And then we had to get out of the plane, and we got on a bunch of us on the tail, holding the tail down, so Swede was out there trying to poke that tire up, and of course he couldn't. We finally wound up taking the tire into the shop and getting it warmed up so we could get air back in it. We finally made it.
And then you had to get your credit cards out and do what?
Oh, yeah, so a lot of times you'd be there at night, and Swede didn't like to fly the airplane with ice on the wings, so we'd all be out with credit cards scraping the wings off, so the airplane was
And then getting in the plane and leaving? And then you got in the plane and left?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the only way you're gonna get home.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a fun ride. That one was, you wouldn't want to miss it. Who's the pilot these days?
Randy Link.
Lake is still
Oh, he's
Randy's
still
gone.
here.
Oh, he's
I'm
gone, he's
glad to
gone.
hear.
He just left employment here. We have Pat Smith and another gentleman we just hired.
Gosh,
Still got a
Randy
turbo
was-
commander, the same airplane?
Yes, we do.
She, okay.
When I first started with the highway department, the department had 2 airplanes. It had an old Cessna that was fitted with the aerial cameras. And it was a single engine outfit. And then the passenger plane that they used for flying people around was a 2-engine. I'm thinking it was a Piper of some sort. Then we got an Aero Commander. There was a reciprocating engine commander. And we just kept that a few years, and then got that turbo commander. And that was a long time ago. You guys are still flying.
We
So
still
that's
are,
good.
yeah. It was the plane we had when I started here in 1990. and
Oh, yeah, I'd have been here a long time then.
It's still going, and we probably spend more on those engines than it costs to fly the plane.
Yes. Here, I remember maybe 30 years ago, there were troubles somewhere in the country of rust or some sort of deterioration in the, I might call it the spine that goes from wingtip to wingtip. And so Swede had to take that plane someplace, and they pretty near dismantled that baby to make sure that everything, there was none of this corrosion that had been happening on some planes of that model in the United States. And it got a clean bill of health anyway.
You know, you chip seal all of our roads, and that's pretty unique. And most states don't do that. Just curious, do you guys know where that practice started?
Well, we've been through different cycles on that. When I went to work for the highway department, the first typical sections we had 3,500s of plant mix across the 24-foot driving lanes, but then on the shoulders, we just had the bottom lift. And then we would put oil and 3/8 chips on the driving lanes and 5/8 chips on the shoulders, so that you got a kind of a rumble strip effect if you were going to run off the road. And but then some people got worried that drop off, from one lift or the double lift to the single lift was going to be a problem. I'm not sure that it ever was. But anyway, like I said, we did chip sealing for a long time, and then we went for a number of years, and we weren't chip sealing. We would just let maintenance do it whenever they figured it needed it 5 or 10 years later. So in the time that I worked for the department, I'd say we went through cycles, and you do want the chips, though, for the good friction properties you get from it. There was a few years when we tried what was called the popcorn seal or the open graded friction course. But it was trapping water, and the pavement underneath it was deteriorating. So that was a kind of an outstanding failure, the whole popcorn seal business. And then we went back to chip sealing. I didn't answer you very good, but that's all I know. Thank you.
You might not remember this one. This is just a curiosity I see on the interstate. When I drive past it, I always wonder what drove this. But and I didn't notice it. One of my friends who has nothing to do with highways asked me this question. So I drive to Missoula all the time. I can't remember exactly where it is, but there's one point in there where we have a median. It's not real wide, but definitely a median. And then all of a sudden, it just widens out. And there's quite a bit more distance between the two interstate lanes. And he asked me that question. I didn't have any idea, didn't have an answer for him.
Well, I'm not sure where you're talking about.
It's got to be around Rock Creek somewhere in that area.
In general, we were trying to provide a depressed median. With 100-foot centers between sets of driving lanes or 70-foot centers. We built some like the Butte Urban, I think, maybe a 60-foot centers. That's about as narrow a depressed median as you can get.
You think he's thinking about Gold Creek? No.
Yeah, I think I got the answer.
East of Gold Creek, that one place by the rest areas. We did spread wide there, and it was.
Oh, you mean where we had independent alignment?
Right, exactly.
Oh, that was just to break up the monotony a little bit, do something different. This is like Hell in the Hill. It's got one set of lanes going up one side of the little coulee there, and the other side coming down. Same way with Gold Creek. It was just to break up the monotony and do something different.
Yeah, I think in this particular place, I know where you mean. It's not actually a separate alignment. The grades, the grades are the same. They're just run parallel. But I think you answered my question, because if you're coming from the west, there's probably a few tight sections in there that forced the alignment a little closer, and then when you got to the open area, you went back to what we wanted for the standard. And that's probably what
That's
it is.
probably. I can't put my mind on the spot and
Yeah.
thinking about it, but we would usually have the wider median unless something confined us to the narrow section.
Yeah, that makes sense.
How did you wind up from Lodge Grass to the Wyoming line? Instead of following the old highway at the water level, how did you wind up so high?
Well, I never worked on that. We had a guy by the name of Jim Keithley that was in the Interstate Division for a while. And they did a lot of studies between Lodge Grass and Ranchester, is that the? Yeah. And I can't tell you, maybe Bob can.
No, I can echo everything you're saying. There's a lot of argument and a couple almost plane crashes down there, in which Bill Dunbar and back was present for one. It was given a lot of study, and part of it was mating up with what Wyoming wanted to do, and I don't have any memory of what Wyoming's particular desires were. I just wasn't.
I think there was some desire, though, to get out of the valley and up into the hills. But I don't know, I was never close to it at all. Bill knows more about it.
Yeah.
First-hand experience.
I can't remember. I remember there was a study from Owl Creek, and is Owl Creek where we ended up? Or is Owl Creek still farther east?
I don't think so. My memory of it is Owl Creek
Farther east.
was Keith. It was further east,
Yeah.
and Keithley was in love with Owl Creek, and felt honestly that it would have been the better decision. But I didn't remember then. Even I didn't know what the heck this really was.
Murray Brown and Carol Graham did one Owl Creek.
Yeah.
We did. Did I remember that much?
What was the first segment of interstate being built and the last in Montana?
Well, the last was the pipe organ through the slide area. It depends on who you talk to, what the first one might have been. Because there was different kinds of money came along. There was IN money before there was real interstate money. Well, I don't know, what would you call the first one?
I guess, yeah, what you're saying was there's different categories of money and somewhat lower standards for the initial ones. Some of the initial ones were on I-15, what was called Monida Lima. That was some of the early money when we didn't know what we were doing that much, but you did it that way. And up where I'm from, Cascade Elm was one of the early ones.
There was one east of Big Timber, east of Springdale.
Yeah.
That was maybe IN money though, or something.
Yeah, pro agency too, I think was IN.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, Bill remembers this better. Yeah.
But the department, what's your version, John? You've been researching this.
I think from what I've seen in the Highway Commission meeting minutes, that Oneida Lima section was the first one. And then the second one was right down around Pro Agency. There was some that were right after that, like down to Springdale area and then up around Cascade and all of
Bob, I have one for you.
Sure.
That right across some old pictures from Core Drill in Montana City, drilling assay for the interstate. I was wondering if you had any recollection of what that involved.
Yeah.
There were patent claims that we were going to be taking for putting the interstate through.
Yeah, another story that I was involved with. The early work that was done down there as far as choosing alignment would have put the interstate on the east, would have put the interstate about where the development that's occurred, the restaurant and all that stuff in Montana City was. And I remember going to Grover and saying, I don't, and advocating that we go where it was finally put. In other words, stay on the tangent, jump the track, get over there on that stuff on the other side when it appeared there was nothing there, and walk around through there. I came to regret that later when I was in right-of-way, because one of the big controversies that we got into involved an attorney here and some people who had unpatented mining claims over there. We didn't deal with the unpatented mining claims the way we should have, and we didn't have possession. So we didn't have possession of land. So an attorney here, and he's now deceased, was a man named Leo Cotis. He had an interest in the claims, not just as counsel, but fiscal, financial interest. And so we let the contract, I can't remember who the contractor was, and I should, but anyhow, then they shut the contractor down. They had us stopped, so we were in an intensive negotiation and begging match, or whatever you want to call it, with the people who had us over the barrel. And then we, in part of our fighting against that, hired a skilled assayer or engineer from Lewistown, I can't remember his name, and we rushed in there and did some coring work to try to get an honest assessment of how much of a claim they had, and so how many bucks we had to pay them. And finally all of that got resolved, but we paid a lot of money for having the contractors shut down, and we paid quite a bit of money to fight the battle. So, and that's only part of the story, and I can't remember much of the rest of it.
Well,
Yeah.
just,
No,
it was a
that's-
little bit different in seeing how they were set up in the pictures, and then I found out I was talking to Buck Buell,
Yeah.
Ray Buell about it, and he
Yeah.
seemed to recall that it
Yeah.
was an assay
No.
job.
Well, we did make mistakes.
I was hoping you were gonna tell us we're gonna be rich.
I don't, it had some, there was some mineral there, whether it's economic, you know how mining stories are, whether it's economically feasible, but something to fight about.
Gold was a lot lower priced then than it is now.
Yeah,
35 bucks now.
I guess that's right. Shoot.
I have a bridge question, and there's not many of us left around here now. I'm the lone representative, but you got any bridge dirt? Well, I shouldn't say dirt, but interesting things. You know, when I started, it was under Norm Rodney. Before him was Howard Stratton. Any good stories in that area? And I heard rumors Norm was, or not Norm, but Howard was related somehow to some problems with the York Bridge construction and had to take a job at planning afterwards. Is that any? Do you know anything about that?
I don't remember any problems with the York Bridge construction.
It had to do with the purchase of the beams, the pre-stressed beams. We had 3 plants in the state at that time, and there was politics on which ones we used.
I wish Jack Walsh were here. For those of you who don't know her, his widow, Catherine Walsh, is here, but she probably heard a lot about that too. Anyhow, Jack was a close friend of mine. The biggest thing I remember, first of all, one character, this is just smart mouth talk maybe, but one characteristic of the bridge engineers was to have intensely different opinions about what was the best answer. Jack was one of those people and felt strongly about his ideas and ways of doing things. He felt, and I can't explain the details of it, but as I understand it, the geology of the York Bridge is that what's down there in the creek bottom is solid bedrock, and the one issue is, okay, how are you going to build a bridge on top of that and get your vertical members to stay in line always, and so on and so on. Jack felt that what was done could have been done better, but I can't tell you in any detail. As I remember, the deal was to make the columns, somehow try to stand them down there and get them to sit still, and then do something else to get them to sit still and build the bridge on top of it. Now, that's a heck of a poor description for an engineer to give, but that's all I know, and all of it comes from conversation when Jack and I were together.
I was fortunate to work with Jack about 3 years.
Oh, is that right? Okay, okay, yeah, yeah.
Great guy.
I was looking at some as-bills for the interstate in North Missoula, and it looked like the interstate went right through a neighborhood. Is that true, and what was it like to work with the public when you were going to take out large swaths of homes?
Well, there by what we called it then was the Erlin Avenue interchange. I think the name has changed now. But we took out a whole neighborhood there, and I don't think there was even relocation assistance there. And the same way out of Milltown, we took out a lot of that, I don't know if it was company housing or employees housing or what. I guess Bob was in right away.
Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't want to be quoted on this. When you're buying houses, it's easier. Houses are very easily valued compared to other kinds of real estate, you know, that buy and sell every day. In some cases, you can get into being criticized for to put it crudely, mucking out a whole neighborhood. And we mucked out not only a neighborhood, we mucked out the Highlander Brewery, and also one historic house that wound up getting moved someplace in South Missoula, and I can't say.
Well, it was the Greenville Mansion.
The what?
Up on the hill.
Well, they moved it up on the
Oh, the Greenville here, yeah, yeah. Anyhow, I guess that, to my knowledge, we weren't severely criticized that way at all. And I think in defense of what we did, there weren't hardly any other good places to go. It was Steve's area, but my sense is that we did the right thing in Missoula, and that really we didn't get beat on very much at all for doing it. We spent a lot of money. We mucked out a nice older neighborhood for quite a ways, and you know.
Well, there was some criticism of us, I think. Like I said earlier, Wellington Rankins thought we should follow the Milwaukee down through, right along the river. And I don't remember who he was representing. Maybe he was representing the Greeno.
No, could well be. Yeah.
I don't even remember who he was representing, but he was sure upset, remember that. He was an old goat then, kind of like I am now. He could still argue pretty good.
One other place you don't think of us that way, to go around the south side of Forsyth. We mucked out maybe a dozen houses going through there. And that I remember, we never heard a peep about it. Now, I'm not saying that's anything to brag about or whatever. I think we did the best thing. But I guess homeowners are easy to deal with than ranchers maybe.
And the ranchers usually, it isn't because of the land they're losing, it's the severance problems that goes with the, you know, that they got, instead of one big ranch, they got a little one over there and a little one over here, and I can't get from one to the other.
One Grover Power story, I went to a public hearing, like I guess Dillon, about one of those jobs down there south of Dillon. And the farmer listens to us for a while, and Grover's conducting the meeting, and he says, well, Mr. Powers, I'd like you to tell me, my patch is here now, and you're going right down the middle of it. How am I going to get my cattle back and forth? And Grover looked him in the eye and says, well, maybe you could rent a helicopter. That didn't go over real good. But that was classic Grover Powers. He's gone now. He helped us a lot.
Our chief photographer used to be a guy by the name of Chet Greer, lived up Colorado Gulch. And he was once said, I think Grover took his public speaking from Casey Stengel.
Can I tell one last Grover story?
Please.
It was a public hearing, and the severance problem came up, like you said. And Grover said, well, my grandpa had that problem, and he'd drive his cow back and forth across the road every day. And one day the bus came and hit grandpa's cow. And the driver got off the bus real quick. And the cow staggered up. The driver said to Grover, Grandpa, well, I'm sorry I hit your cow, but I don't think I hurt her. Grover's grandpa said, well, I'd be glad to pay you for any good you did.
Nope. You're going in one go.
All right, well, is there any other questions? We'll probably just turn the recorders off and thank you guys for
There aren't
coming
many
again.
left, but we're flattered that you people came and listened to us.
Thank you.
Yell
It's very
if we
interesting.
can answer anything else, please.